Welcome back to Kuma English Listening Hub. Today, we are stepping into the soft glow of a railway carriage at midnight, somewhere between Vienna and Paris, to explore a quietly unfolding story, the comeback of the European night train. For a while, it looked as though overnight rail travel in Europe was destined for the scrapyard of history. Cheap flights, budget airlines, and the cult of speed seemed to have won. But in recent years, something rather unexpected has happened. Night trains, those slightly romantic, slightly shabby symbols of another era, are returning to the tracks. In this episode, we will look at why these trains disappeared, why they are returning, and what their revival tells us about Europe, the environment, and our changing attitude to travel. Along the way, we will listen in on the different characters who share a night train, the backpacker on a shoestring budget, the business traveler fed up with airports, the family with 2 sleepy children, and the quietly exhausted staff who make the whole thing work. So, if you are sitting comfortably, perhaps with a cup of tea, let us set off from the platform. First, a bit of context. For many decades, European night trains were not a novelty at all. They were simply how people traveled long distances without losing the working day. You would leave a city in the evening, tuck yourself into a bunk, and arrive somewhere entirely different by breakfast, slightly crumpled but with your day intact. However, from the 1,990 seconds onwards, budget airlines upended everything. Flying from London to Barcelona started to cost less than a decent takeaway. Passengers deserted the night trains in droves. National railway companies, often cash-strapped and under political pressure, decided that running overnight services was more trouble than it was worth. They were, if you like, seen as a bit old hat. Carriages grew shabby. Routes were axed. Sleeper cars were quietly taken out of service. Newspapers announced, with a faint sense of resignation, the death of the night train. It felt, at the time, fairly definitive. And yet, here we are, barely a decade later, and the story has taken a sharp turn. Let us ask the obvious question: why are night trains coming back now? One reason is environmental. Europe has, in the last few years, become keenly aware of the carbon footprint of flying. If you have ever booked a flight online, you will know that airlines are now obliged to inform you, however discreetly, of the CO2 emissions involved. For many younger travelers, flying everywhere, all the time, no longer seems quite so clever. Night trains offer a very different proposition. They are dramatically more energy efficient per passenger. They run on existing infrastructure. In some countries, they are powered largely or entirely by renewable electricity. For climate-conscious travelers, they tick a great many boxes, but it is not just about emissions. Something more subtle is going on. Consider the experience of air travel, the early alarm, the trek to an out-of-the-way airport, the security queues in your socks, the plastic trays, the boarding scrum, the cramped seat with a stranger's elbow in your ribs. Then, another queue at the other end, and possibly a long bus or train ride into the city center. Now compare this with a night train. You stroll into a central station after dinner. The architecture is often grand, a little theatrical. The departure board flips over with a satisfying clatter. Your train glides in. You find your compartment, stow your luggage, and, once the ticket inspection has been done and dusted, you are left to your own devices. Yes, the bed may be narrow. Yes, the pillow might have seen better days. But you close your eyes in one city and, if all goes well, open them in another. No jet lag, no cabin pressure, no faff over liquids in plastic bags. There is also a kind of romance to it, which people are slightly embarrassed to admit. You are, after all, hurtling through the night in a moving hotel, sharing a limited amount of space with complete strangers. It is faintly cinematic. Many of us grew up on Agatha Christie and old spy films, where crucial conversations always seem to happen in the corridor of a sleeper train. Blimey, you might think, that sounds rather idyllic. In reality, it is rarely quite that glamorous. But it is undeniably different from shuffling onto a plane at Gate 29B. To understand the resurgence properly, we need to zoom in on the people who run these trains. It was the Austrian Federal Railways, OBB, that became something of an unlikely hero in this story. While other national rail operators were busy scrapping their night services, Austria decided to double down. OBB bought up sleeper carriages that the Germans and the Swiss no longer wanted. They rebranded the service as Nightjet, gave it a distinct visual identity, and started to treat night trains as something to be proud of, rather than a slightly embarrassing relic. At first, many commentators were skeptical. The general view was that they were throwing good money after bad. But passenger numbers crept up and then surged. Before long, the Austrians were running night trains from Vienna and Innsbruck to far-flung cities across the continent. Other countries began to take note. New routes appeared, sometimes run by startups rather than state-owned giants. Paris to Berlin, Brussels to Prague, Stockholm to Hamburg. A patchwork network began to grow quite quietly across the map. What is particularly interesting is that this has happened not just in spite of, but partly because of the dominance of budget airlines. Many travelers tried the hyper-cheap, hyper-fast option, found themselves utterly knackered by the experience, and began to look around for an alternative that felt more civilized. Of course, it is not all smooth sailing. Night trains are technically and politically complicated. Each route may pass through several countries, each with its own safety regulations, signaling systems, staffing rules, and commercial interests. Getting one train to cross 3 or 4 borders overnight is, to put it mildly, not straightforward. Then there is the matter of rolling stock. Proper sleeper carriages are expensive to buy and expensive to maintain. They need bathrooms, proper ventilation, reinforced doors, and complex safety systems. You cannot just throw a mattress into a standard carriage and call it a day. There is also stiff competition from high-speed day trains. In much of Western Europe, you can now travel between major cities at astonishing speed. Why take a night train from, say, Paris to Frankfurt when a high-speed train can do the journey in a few daylight hours? So the companies that run night trains have to be very canny. They have to choose routes where flying is common, tiring, and not especially cheap. They have to offer an experience that is not luxurious in the 5-star hotel sense, but that feels good value, human, and vaguely indulgent. And, inevitably, they have to manage the expectations of passengers who may have been seduced by glossy photographs online. Some travelers, on discovering that their compartment looks more like an upgraded student dormitory than the Orient Express, feel rather shortchanged. Fair enough, you might say. If you are paying a premium, you want a bit of style. But let us step inside the train itself for a moment and listen. In one compartment, 3 strangers have been thrown together by the booking system. An older Italian couple, perpetually offering biscuits, and a younger British woman traveling home after a long Erasmus year abroad. They begin the journey slightly wary of one another, but the combination of shared space, limited Wi-Fi, and the mild absurdity of climbing into bunk beds eventually melts the awkwardness. They exchange stories in a blend of languages, comparing rail delays, favorite cities, and the small absurdities of life. By midnight, the compartment is dark, except for the faint blue light of a phone screen and the gentle rattle of the carriage. Down the corridor, the conductor is on his 3rd round of ticket checks. He is tidy, polite, and politely exhausted. He deals with lost reservations, confused tourists, and that one passenger who always insists that they absolutely booked a private cabin when, manifestly, they did not. His work is invisible when everything goes to plan. When something goes wrong, he suddenly becomes the most important person on the train. In the seated coach, further along, there are students traveling on the cheap, determined to save every last euro. They wedge themselves into reclining chairs, wrap jumpers around their heads, and attempt to sleep in contorted, vaguely yoga-like positions. It is not exactly comfort, but it is camaraderie. They know that in 10 years' time, this will be the story they tell, not the one about another anonymous flight. What night trains reveal, perhaps more than anything, is that travel is not just a means to get from A to B. It is, in the fullest sense, a space in between. A liminal zone, as anthropologists might put it, where normal rules are slightly suspended. On a night train, you are both somewhere and nowhere. You are between cities, between languages, between time zones. You hear snatches of conversation in half a dozen tongues. You catch glimpses of lit-up villages, industrial estates, ports, forests, and occasionally the sea all slipping past your window. This in-betweenness used to be taken for granted. Journeys took time, and people simply accepted that. But the budget airline revolution trained us to see travel time as dead time. Something to be minimized, shaved away, eliminated. The revival of night trains suggests that some of us have had second thoughts. We are not, it seems, entirely content with the idea that the world should be reduced to a sequence of origin and destination points, with nothing meaningful in between. There is a countercultural flavor to choosing a night train. You are, in a small way, opting out of the cult of speed. You are saying, in effect, that you are prepared to let the journey itself matter. Let us bring Britain into the picture for a moment. The UK, famously, is physically disconnected from mainland Europe by the Channel, and this shapes the entire conversation. Within Britain, there is one particularly iconic night service, the Caledonian Sleeper, which runs between London and the Scottish Highlands. It too has gone through periods of neglect and glamour, of threatened closure and enthusiastic relaunch. It offers a distinctly British interpretation of the night train, tartan touches, regional whiskies, and a breakfast that, at least in principle, might involve a proper cooked option rather than a cellophane-wrapped muffin. On a good day, or rather a good night, it captures something many British people are quietly proud of. The idea that you can board a train at Euston Station after a glass of red in the lounge and wake up near a lock, surrounded by hills and mist. It is a reminder that even on a relatively small island, there is room for journey and destination to feel radically different. The fact that this service has survived, often against the odds, tells us that there is a stubborn appeal in the idea of sleeping on a train. It is impractical in some ways, more expensive than you might like, occasionally beset by delays. And yet, it endures. Looking forward, what might happen next? We can imagine several scenarios. In the most optimistic version, night trains become a fully integrated part of Europe's transport system. Tickets are easy to book, connections line up neatly, and you can plan an itinerary from Lisbon to Warsaw using a single app, safe in the knowledge that someone somewhere has thought it through. In a more cautious version, night trains remain a bit of a niche. They survive on a patchwork of subsidies, climate policies, and enthusiastic travelers, but never quite become mainstream. They are treasured by those who use them, but ignored by the majority. There is also the risk that they could become, frankly, a bit too trendy. If night trains turn into Instagram backdrops for the well-off, rather than an affordable, practical option for ordinary people, some of the moral force behind their environmental credentials will be quietly undermined. The truth is likely to sit somewhere in the middle. Night trains will not, on their own, solve Europe's transport emissions problem. They will not render airports obsolete. But they may carve out a distinctive role as the thinking person's alternative. Slower, yes, but richer in experience, less polished but more human. From a linguistic point of view, night trains are quite handy for learners of English too. They are full of the sort of low-key, everyday interactions that matter in real life. Asking a stranger if they would mind swapping bunks. Apologizing when you trip over someone's rucksack in the dark. Negotiating who gets to have the window seat. Checking, politely but firmly, whether the noise in the corridor could possibly be turned down. These are not grand textbook dialogues. They are utterly ordinary, but at C2 level, they are exactly the sort of thing you want to be able to handle with a bit of grace, a touch of humor, and the occasional idiomatic flourish. You might say, for instance, when the train is running late, "Well, that is us sorted then. We are going to miss the connection, aren't we?" Or, if the compartment is particularly cramped, "It is a bit of a squeeze, but we will manage. Could you pass that bag, mate?" Or, after a long, restless night, I am absolutely knackered. But waking up to that view was spot on. These turn-of-phrase moments, modest as they seem, are what make your English sound properly natural, properly lived in. As we roll towards the end of this episode, it is worth stepping back for a final reflection. The comeback of European night trains is not just a story about transport policy or carbon emissions. It is, at heart, a story about how we imagine movement in the modern world. For decades, we have been told that faster is always better, that convenience should trump everything, and that time spent in transit is, by definition, wasted. The growing interest in night trains suggests that many people are no longer entirely convinced. They want journeys that feel like journeys, not just logistics. They want space to read, to talk, to think, to look out of the window and see something other than clouds or motorways. They want, perhaps, the reassurance that life does not have to be lived permanently at full throttle. In choosing a night train, you are making a small but meaningful statement that you are not in quite such a rush, that you are prepared to trade a bit of speed for a bit of experience, that you are not entirely taken in by the promise that everything must be instant, and if that means clambering into a bunk in a slightly draughty carriage, listening to the rattle of the tracks, and trusting that, by morning, you will have crossed an entire continent while half asleep, then so be it. There is, you might say, something quietly brilliant about that. Cheers for listening, and until next time, travel well, sleep if you can, and keep your ears tuned for the next journey with Kuma English Listening Hub.